The drums had already started when Elira Voss realized there was no way out of the hall. Every exit was blocked by rows of pack warriors standing shoulder to shoulder, their eyes gleaming with a hunger for entertainment that had nothing to do with kindness. She stood at the center of the stone floor, her bare feet cold against the ancient carvings beneath her, and she understood, in that single breath, that she had walked into a trap built just for her. The mating ritual of the Nightfall Pack was supposed to be a celebration. Every unbonded wolf between the ages of 18 and 30 was required to attend, kneel before the gathered elite, and either be chosen or choose in return. For most, it was a night of nerves and hope. For Elira, whose family owed a debt to the Pack Council that could never be repaid in coin, it had been engineered into something else entirely. She saw it in the smack of Cade Thornwell before the drums even reached their peak. He sat on the raised platform beside the council elders, dressed in silver-trimmed armor that caught the torchlight, and he watched her the way a hunter watches a rabbit that has already run out of food. Cade had spent the last 3 years reminding her family, in small and large ways, that they existed only because his goodwill allowed it. Tonight, he intended to make that humiliation public, in front of every wolf who mattered in the territory. The elder at the podium raised his staff and called the first name. One by one, the strong and the beautiful were paired off, their bonds sealed to cheers and howls of approval. Elira watched the crowd thin, watched hopeful faces light up as partners were announced, and felt her own dread thicken with every name that was not hers. Then the elder called her name. The hall went quiet in the particular way that only happens before something cruel is about to happen. Elira walked to the center, her spine straight even though her knees wanted to give out, and she saw Cade rise from his seat. He did not walk toward her. He turned to the crowd instead, smiling as if sharing a private joke, and said her family's death made her an unsuitable match for anyone of standing in the pack. He said it lightly, almost gently, which made it worse. Laughter rippled through the warriors near the front. A few of the younger wolves, eager to please a man of Cade's influence, laughed harder than they needed to. Elira felt her face burn. She had known this might happen. She had told herself she was prepared for it. But knowing a blow is coming and feeling it land are two very different things, and for a moment the entire hall tilted around her, full of firelight and cruel amusement, and she thought she might simply turn and run. Running would have confirmed everything Cade wanted the pack to believe about her family. That they were small. That they could be discarded without consequence. She would not give him that. Her eyes swept the crowd, searching for anything, anyone, who might offer her a way to leave this ritual with her dignity intact. The tradition was clear. If no one chose her, she was permitted to choose instead, and once she knelt before someone, the ritual bond was considered sealed, whether the pack approved or not. It was an old rule, rarely used, built for wolves who had been publicly rejected and needed a way to reclaim their place. Her gaze passed over the warriors, the hunters, the sons of council members who would never look twice at her now. And then, near the servant's door at the edge of the hall, she saw him. Rowan. He was a servant, one of the quiet ones who cleaned the training grounds and carried water for the guards and never spoke unless spoken to first. She had passed him 100 times without truly seeing him. Tonight, for reasons she could not name, she saw him clearly. He stood apart from the celebration, arms loosely at his sides, watching the scene unfold with an expression that held no mockery at all. Just quiet attention. The laughter around her grew louder. Cade opened his mouth to say something else, something designed to cut deeper. Elira moved before she let herself think about it. She crossed the hall, past the stunned faces of warriors who had never imagined she would come anywhere near the servant's side of the room, and she knelt in front of Rowan. The laughter did not stop. If anything, it grew sharper, crueler, delighted by this unexpected turn. A woman rejected by the pack's elite, kneeling before its lowest-ranked servant. It was, to most of the room, the funniest thing they had seen in years. Elira kept her eyes down, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, and she waited for Rowan to step back in horror, to refuse her, to add his own rejection to the pile. Instead, she felt a hand extend toward her, steady and warm. She looked up. Rowan's face showed no embarrassment, no reluctance. He simply waited, patient, until she placed a hand in his and let him help her to her feet. He said nothing. He did not need to. His silence, in that moment, felt more solid than any words could have been. Kate's smile faltered for just a heartbeat before he recovered it, turning the moment into another joke for the crowd, declaring loudly that the pack had witnessed a most unusual bonding indeed. The hall roared with laughter again, but this time Elira barely heard it. She was too aware of the warmth of Rowan's hand, too startled by how calm he seemed in the middle of a room built to destroy them both. The elder at the podium, visibly uncomfortable but bound by tradition, cleared his throat and announced the bond as sealed. Old rules were old rules, whether the room found them funny or not. Elira Voss and Rowan, servant of the training grounds, were declared mates under pack law. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Elira remembered walking out of the hall with Rowan a step behind her, remembered the whispers following them like smoke, remembered Kate's laughter chasing her all the way to the door. She did not remember deciding to keep walking until she reached the edge of the courtyard, where the night air finally hit her lungs and she allowed herself to breathe. Rowan stopped a respectful distance away, giving her space she had not asked for but desperately needed. "You did not have to help me," she said finally, not looking at him. "You could have stepped back. No one would have blamed you." "I know," he said. His voice was low, calm, entirely without the mockery she had braced herself for. "Then why didn't you?" He considered the question longer than she expected. "Because you were the only person in that room being honest," he said. "Everyone else was performing. You were simply trying to survive it." She turned to look at him properly for the first time. In the moonlight, his face was calm in a way that felt unfamiliar to her, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world despite the chaos they had both just walked through. There was a stillness in him that did not match the servant robes he wore, though she could not have explained why she noticed it. "They will not let this go quietly," she warned him. "Cade will make certain of that." "I imagine he will try," Rowan said, and there was something in the way he said it, some quiet confidence, that made her wonder, just for a moment, whether she had misjudged the man standing in front of her. She dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it came. He was a servant. He cleaned floors and hauled water. Whatever calm he carried was simply the calm of a man who had learned to expect very little from the world and therefore feared very little from it. She did not yet know how wrong that assumption was. They walked back toward the servants' quarters in silence, the noise of the ritual fading behind them, replaced by the sound of wind moving through the pine trees that surrounded the park's territory. Elira's mind raced through everything that had just happened, replaying the laughter, replaying Kate's smile, replaying the strange steadiness of the hand that had helped her rise. Her family's small cottage sat near the edge of the servants' district, close enough to the main hall that she could still hear faint music drifting from the celebration that continued without her. Her mother, Marin, was waiting at the door, her face tight with worry the moment she saw Elira's expression. "What happened?" Marin asked, her eyes flicking to Rowan, then back to her daughter. "Where is your ritual partner? Who chose you?" Elira opened her mouth to explain, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain any of it? That she had knelt before a servant to escape a trap. That the pack was already laughing. That her mother's careful hope for a stable match, someone who might ease their family's burden, had been replaced by something far stranger. "I chose him," Elira said finally, gesturing toward Rowan, who stood a polite distance behind her. "It's done." The elder confirmed the bond. Marin's eyes widened as she took in Rowan properly, his simple clothing, his calloused hands, the quiet way he stood without demanding attention. For a moment, worry and confusion whirled across her face, but she said nothing cruel, only reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Come inside," she said softly. "Both of you. It has been a long night." Rowan hesitated at the doorway, as if unsure whether the invitation truly extended to him, before stepping inside behind Elira. The cottage was small and warm but clean, filled with the scent of dried herbs from Marin's healing work. Elira sank onto a wooden bench near the fire, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt, as though the events of the evening had drained something out of her that would take days to refill. Marin busied herself preparing tea, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone trying to distract herself from her own worry. Rowan remained standing near the door until Elira gestured for him to sit, which he did carefully, as though unused to being offered a seat in someone else's home. You don't have to stay tonight, Elira said quietly. I know this was not what either of us wanted. I don't mind staying, Rowan answered, and something in his tone made her look at him again. Not pity. Not discomfort. Just simple honesty. Marion handed them both cups of tea and sat across from them, studying Rowan with the careful attention of a mother trying to determine what kind of man had just entered her daughter's life. You work the training grounds, she said. It was not quite a question. I do, Rowan said. For how long? Several months, he answered, and something flickered briefly behind his eyes before he continued. Before that, I traveled. Marion seemed to accept this, though Elira noticed the slight pause before his answer, the careful way he chose his words. She filed the observation away without knowing why it mattered, too tired from the events of the evening to examine it closely. Outside, the celebration continued without them, faint music and distant laughter carrying on the wind. Elira listened to it for a while, feeling strangely separate from it now, as though the ritual that had defined her entire evening had already become a memory belonging to someone else. They would talk about this for weeks, she said finally, staring into her tea. Cade will make sure of it. Let them talk, Rowan said simply. That's easy for you to say. You don't have a family whose reputation depends on the pack's opinion. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them, aware of how they might sound to a man with no family standing at all, a servant with nothing to protect but himself. But Rowan did not flinch. He simply looked at her with the same calm patience he had shown all evening. I understand more than you think, he said quietly. Something in his voice made her want to ask what he meant, but exhaustion pulled at her, heavy and insistent, and Marion soon ushered them both toward rest, insisting that whatever troubles the morning brought could wait until they had slept. Rowan was given a space near the hearth, and Elira retreated to her small room, lying awake far longer than she intended, replaying the strange stillness in his eyes. She did not yet understand what she had truly knelt before that night. She only knew that for the first time since the ritual began, she felt something unexpected settle over the fear that had gripped her for weeks. She felt, for reasons she could not name, safe. Morning came with the sound of raised voices near the cottage gate. Elira woke to find several pack guards standing outside, sent by the council to confirm the details of the previous night's ritual bond. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Rowan already awake, standing near the gate with the same quiet composure he had carried through the entire humiliating ceremony. The lead guard, a broad-shouldered man named Garrick, studied Rowan with open confusion, as though trying to reconcile the calm figure in front of him with the servant status listed in the pack records. The council wants it noted formally, Garrick said, addressing Elira but glancing repeatedly at Rowan. The bond stands, whether anyone finds it amusing or not. It stands, Elira confirmed, lifting her chin. Garrick nodded, though his eyes lingered on Rowan a moment longer than necessary before he turned and led his men back toward the main hall. Elira watched them go, aware of the whispers that would already be spreading through the park, the story of the humiliated healer's daughter and the servant she had chosen in desperation. She did not yet know that the whispers would soon turn into something else entirely. She did not know that the calm, quiet man standing beside her carried a truth so large it would eventually reshape everything she believed about strength, about worth, and about the ritual that had bound them together in the first place. For now, she only knew that the night had changed something in her, some quiet shift she could not yet name, and that whatever came next, she would not be facing it as the same woman who had walked into that hall the evening before. 3 days after the ritual, Elira found a snake in her family's water barrel. It was dead, placed there deliberately, its body coiled around the wooden ladle in a way that made the message unmistakable. She stared at it for a long moment before calling for Rowan, who removed it without comment, though she noticed the tightness in his jaw as he carried it away to bury it far from the cottage. This is only the beginning, she said when he returned, wiping his hands on a cloth. Cade won't let this rest. He wanted to humiliate me publicly, and instead the whole pack is talking about how strange it is that I chose you. He'll want to finish what he started. Let him try, Rowan said, and though his tone remained calm, something in his eyes had shifted since the previous morning, something sharper, more alert. Elira wanted to press him further, to ask what exactly he meant by that, but the days that followed gave her little time to think about anything beyond survival. Word of the ritual had spread through every corner of the park's territory, and with it came a strange kind of attention she had never experienced before. At the market, wolves who had never spoken to her suddenly greeted her with careful politeness. At the training grounds, guards who once ignored Rowan entirely now stepped aside when he passed, offering brief nods that seemed almost involuntary. Elira noticed it first with a young guard named Dane, who nearly tripped over himself apologizing when he bumped into Rowan near the supply shed, though Rowan had said nothing and shown no sign of offense. "Why do they act like that around you?" she asked one evening, watching from the doorway as Rowan repaired a section of fence that had been broken for months, his hands moving with quiet efficiency despite the darkness settling over the yard. "Act like what?" Rowan asked without looking up. "Careful. Respectful. Like they are afraid to upset you." She crossed her arms, studying him. "You're a servant. No one should behave that way around a servant." Rowan paused, setting down his tools for a moment. "Maybe they simply respect kindness when they see it," he said. "I've never given anyone a reason to fear me." It was a reasonable answer, and yet something about it did not sit comfortably with Elira. She had grown up watching the park social order operate with rigid precision, servants at the bottom, warriors and council families at the top, respect flowing strictly upward and rarely, if ever, in reverse. The behavior she witnessed around Rowan broke that pattern in small, subtle ways that most people would never notice unless they were looking closely. She was looking closely now. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself standing near her window, watching Rowan sit alone near the fire he had built for warmth, staring into the flames with an expression she could not read. There was a weight to his stillness that felt different from exhaustion, something closer to the careful patience of a man waiting for a storm he knew was coming. The following week, the storm arrived in the form of a border patrol assignment. Cade, who held influence over the assignment of duties despite not officially commanding the park's guard forces, made certain that Rowan was placed on a patrol route known for its danger. The eastern border had seen increased activity from the Ashvale Park, a rival territory whose relationship with Nightfall had grown tense over disputed hunting grounds. Patrols along that border were typically reserved for experienced warriors, not servants with no combat training. Elira learned of the assignment from Marin, who had heard it from a neighbor already gossiping about how the park council seemed intent on testing the strange newborn born from the ritual. "They are sending him to the border," Marin said, worry creasing her forehead as she prepared herbs for a healing salve. "That patrol has lost 2 guards this season already. If something happens to him out there, no one will call it foul play. They'll simply say the border claimed another life." Elira felt something cold settle in her stomach. She found Rowan near the training grounds, coiling rope with the same steady calm he brought to every task, and she confronted him immediately. "You cannot go on that patrol," she said. "It's a death sentence." Cade arranged this deliberately. "I'm aware," Rowan said simply. "Then refuse it." "I can't refuse an assigned duty without consequence to your family," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "The council would see it as proof that the bond was a mistake, and they would use that excuse to reconsider protections your family currently holds because of it." Elira had not considered that angle, and the realization made her chest tighten with frustration. Since the ritual, her family's standing, precarious as it was, had been protected somewhat by the formal bond, a technicality of park law that Cade could not easily override without appearing to challenge tradition itself. If Rowan refused his duty now, it would give Cade exactly the excuse he needed to strip that protection away. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not." It wasn't a request. Rowan studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before he finally exhaled. "It's dangerous, Elira. I mean that seriously." "I understand danger," she said. "I understood it the moment I knelt in front of you at that ritual. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what I intend to do." He did not argue further, though the tension in his shoulders suggested he wanted to. 2 days later, when the patrol group departed toward the eastern border, Elira followed at a careful distance, staying just far enough behind to avoid detection by the other guards while keeping Rowan within sight. The border region was thick with pine forest, the undergrowth dense enough to swallow sound, the air carrying a tension that seemed to increase with every mile they traveled from the safety of the park's central territory. Elira moved carefully, grateful for the years she had spent gathering herbs in similar terrain, though her heart pounded harder than she wanted to admit. The attack came without warning. One moment, the patrol group was moving in careful formation along a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. The next, the forest erupted with movement, warriors from the Ashvale Pack emerging from the tree in a coordinated ambush that scattered the Nightfall guards within seconds. Elira froze behind a cluster of boulders, watching in horror as the chaos unfolded, searching desperately for Rowan among the confusion. She found him at the center of it, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Rowan moved through the ambush with a precision that had nothing to do with servant training, nothing to do with hauling water or cleaning floors. He disarmed the first attacker with a single fluid motion, redirecting the man's momentum into the ground before he had even registered what happened. A second attacker lunged, and Rowan sidestepped with an economy of movement that suggested years of discipline far beyond anything the training grounds could teach. He subdued 3 warriors within moments, none of them seriously harmed, all of them clearly outmatched by a skill level that made a mockery of his supposed status. The remaining Ashvale warriors, recognizing something in his bearing that the confusion of battle had briefly revealed, hesitated, then retreated into the tree rather than continue an engagement they suddenly understood they could not win. The Nightfall guards, scattered and shaken, stared at Rowan with expressions of open confusion. Garrick, who had led the patrol, approached him slowly, his sword still raised, his eyes searching Rowan's face as though trying to place a memory just out of reach. "Who are you?" Garrick asked, his voice low. Rowan's expression shifted, something gathered settling over his features as he became aware of the eyes now fixed on him. "Someone who has traveled more than the pack records suggest," he said carefully, offering nothing further. Elira, still hidden behind the boulders, felt her mind racing to process what she had just witnessed. The calm servant who cleaned training grounds and carried water without complaint had just single-handedly ended an ambush that should have overwhelmed an entire patrol. She thought of the guards who stepped aside for him without being asked, the strange respect that seemed to follow him despite his supposed status, the stillness in his eyes that had never quite matched the role he played. She emerged from her hiding place before she could stop herself, drawing every eye in the clearing toward her. Rowan's expression flickered with something between concern and resignation when he saw her. "You followed me," he said quietly. "I told you I would," she answered, though her voice trembled slightly as she took in the scene around them, the subdued warriors, the stunned guards, the strange authority radiating from a man she had believed, until this moment, to be exactly what he appeared. Garrick lowered his sword slowly, though his eyes remained fixed on Rowan with an expression that bordered on recognition. "The way you move," he said slowly. "I've seen that discipline before, years ago, in the border wars. Only warriors trained under royal command move like that." The clearing fell silent. Rowan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since Elira had known him, she saw something close to alarm cross his features. "We should return to the pack territory," Rowan said, his tone deliberately steering the conversation elsewhere. "The Ashvale warriors may regroup. It isn't safe to linger here." Garrick did not press the matter further, though the look he gave Rowan carried a weight that suggested the question had not truly been dismissed, only postponed. The patrol reformed quickly, gathering their scattered members and beginning the journey back toward Nightfall territory, the mood shifting from fear to a strange, uneasy curiosity that followed Rowan like a shadow. Elira walked beside him in silence for a long while, her thoughts a storm she could not quite organize. Finally, unable to hold the question any longer, she spoke. "Who are you, really?" Rowan glanced at her, and for a moment she thought he might finally answer honestly. Instead, he offered a careful half-truth. "I told you before. I've traveled more than most people here realize. I've learned things along the way that most servants never have reason to learn." "That doesn't answer my question." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust me a little longer, Elira. There are reasons for the things you've seen today, reasons I intend to explain, but not here, and not yet." She wanted to demand more, to insist that after everything they had already shared, after the ritual and the humiliation and the strange safety she had felt beside him since that first night, he owed her honesty. But something in his eyes, some quiet plea beneath the careful composure, made her hold her tongue. "I trusted you enough to kneel before you in front of the entire pack," she said finally. I suppose I can trust you a little longer. Relief passed briefly across his face before the careful mask settled back into place. They walked the rest of the journey largely in silence, though Elira noticed the way the other guards kept a careful distance from Rowan now, their earlier confusion replaced by something closer to wary respect. By the time they reached the park's central territory, word of the ambush and its strange resolution had already begun to spread, carried by whispers among the returning guards who could not quite explain what they had witnessed. Elira knew, with growing certainty, that whatever secret Rowan carried would not remain hidden much longer. She did not yet know how right she was, or how quickly the truth would arrive, or how completely it would change everything she believed about the man she had chosen in a moment of desperation, only to find herself bound to something far larger than either of them had expected. Cade summoned the full council within a week of the ambush. He stood before the gathered elders with the confidence of a man who believed he had finally found the weapon he needed, his voice carrying easily through the stone hall that had, only recently, hosted the ritual that started everything. Elira sat near the back of the chamber, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching as Cade laid out his accusation with practiced precision. The servant known as Rowan deliberately allowed the ambush to occur, Cade declared, his eyes sweeping the room for effect. Witnesses report strange behavior, skills he should not possess, movements more suited to a trained assassin than a man who cleans training grounds. I believe he orchestrated the attack himself, perhaps in league with the Ashvale Park, to gain favor and standing within our territory. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. Elira felt her stomach twist with anger at the blatant dishonesty of the accusation, knowing full well that Rowan had saved the patrol rather than endangered it. She rose from her seat, ready to speak in his defense, but Garrick, seated among the assembled guards who had witnessed the ambush firsthand, stood first. "That is not what happened," Garrick said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of someone unwilling to let a false narrative stand unchallenged. "The servant defended us. Without him, the patrol would have suffered far greater losses. Whatever else he may be, he is not an enemy of this park." Cade's expression tightened, though he recovered quickly. "Then perhaps," he said smoothly, "the council would benefit from understanding exactly what he is, rather than relying on the confused impressions of guards who nearly lost their lives in the chaos of battle. I propose a formal challenge. Let the servant prove his loyalty and his worth through combat, under the council's direct observation, rather than hiding behind vague reports and second-hand accounts." The chamber erupted into discussion, elders debating the merits and dangers of such a challenge, while Elira felt dread settle heavily in her chest. A formal challenge meant real danger, a public contest designed less to reveal truth and more to give Cade the opportunity to eliminate a threat he did not fully understand but feared regardless. She found Rowan later that evening near the edge of the training grounds, his expression carefully neutral despite what she knew must be happening beneath the surface. "You heard about the challenge," she said. "I did. Cade wants you dead, Rowan. This isn't about proving loyalty. It's about giving him an excuse to remove you permanently, in front of witnesses, so no one can call it anything other than the outcome of a fair contest." "I know that too," Rowan said quietly. "Then what will you do?" He was silent for a long moment, staring toward the darkening horizon where the last light of the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. "I think," he said finally, "the time for hiding has passed. Cade has forced my hand in ways I hope to avoid, at least for now. But perhaps this was always going to happen eventually. Truth has a way of finding its moment, whether we're ready for it or not." "What truth?" Elira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rowan, please. I've trusted you through all of this. I deserve to understand what I'm walking into before the entire pack does." He turned to look at her fully then, and something in his expression shifted, the careful mask he had worn for months finally beginning to crack. "I am not simply a traveler who learned to fight along difficult roads," he said slowly. "I came to this park because I received reports of corruption within its council, reports that suggested resources meant for vulnerable families like yours, were being redirected for personal gain by certain members with influence over pack decisions. I chose to live among the lowest ranks to observe without drawing attention, to gather proof before taking action that could not easily be dismissed or covered up." "Who sent you to investigate?" Elira asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer before he spoke it. "No one sent me," Rowan said quietly. I have the authority to investigate matters like this myself. The weight of his words settled over her slowly, pieces of the last several months rearranging themselves into a pattern she had been too close to see clearly until now. The guards who stepped aside without being asked. The strange, involuntary respect that followed him even when he wore the simplest clothing. The discipline in his movements during the ambush, discipline that Garrick had recognized as belonging to warriors trained under royal command. You're not a servant at all, she said slowly, the realization settling into words. You never were. Rowan held her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of what he carried behind his careful composure, a burden he had shouldered alone for months while pretending to be nothing more than a man who cleaned floors and carried water. I am Rowan Ashgrave, he said quietly. Alpha King of the Ember Throne. The words hit her like a physical force, and for a long moment, she could not speak at all. The Ember Throne was not merely another territory among many. It was one of the oldest and most powerful lines in the region, its ruler holding authority that extended far beyond the Nightfall Park's modest borders, commanding respect and, when necessary, obedience from smaller territories that depended on the Ember Throne's protection and trade agreements. You're the king, she repeated, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. You've been living as a servant. In my family's territory. For months. Yes. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended, months of confusion and fear and slowly building trust crashing together into something closer to anger. Why deceive an entire pack? Why let me believe you were nothing more than a servant with no standing at all? Because the moment my identity becomes known, everything changes, Rowan said, his voice carrying a weariness she had never heard from him before. Council members who might otherwise cooperate with an investigation become defensive, calculating, more concerned with protecting their position than revealing truth. I needed to see the corruption clearly, without interference, before I could act against it with proof strong enough that no one could dismiss it as royal overreach or personal grudge. And the ritual? Elira asked, her voice trembling now. Did you know? Did you expect me to choose you that night? No, Rowan said immediately, and something in the intensity of his answer convinced her he spoke the truth. I expected to remain unnoticed through the entire ceremony, as I had through every gathering before it. I never imagined anyone would choose me, let alone a woman being publicly humiliated by the very corruption I came here to expose. When you knelt in front of me, I nearly refused, out of fear that accepting would draw attention I could not afford. Why didn't you refuse, then? His expression softened, something vulnerable slipping through the careful composure he had maintained for so long. Because you looked at me the way no one had looked at me in years, he said quietly. Not as a king. Not as a title or a position to be used or feared. Simply as a person, choosing me because I happened to be standing there when you needed someone to see you as more than a joke. I could not refuse that, Elira. Not even to protect my mission. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, though she could not have said whether they came from anger, relief, or something far more complicated tangled between the two. You should have told me, she said. All those nights, all those moments I worried for your safety, believing you were simply a servant with no protection at all. I was afraid for you, Rowan. I followed you to that border, terrified I might lose you, and the entire time you were Dash. I was terrified too, Rowan interrupted gently. Not for myself. For you. Every day I remained silent was a day I risked you discovering the truth in a way that might endanger you, should the wrong people learn of my identity before I was ready to reveal it properly. I never wanted to deceive you, Elira. I wanted to protect you, and I made the only choice available to me at the time. She wanted to be angry, wanted to hold on to the sharp edges of betrayal that still stung beneath her skin, but the sincerity in his voice, the quiet vulnerability she had never seen him show anyone else, made it difficult to sustain that anger for long. The challenge, she said finally, forcing herself back to the immediate danger they still faced. Cade wants a formal combat challenge. If your identity becomes known now, before that challenge, what happens? Everything changes, Rowan said grimly. Cade's plan depended entirely on my status remaining hidden or uncertain. Once the pack understands who I truly am, his accusations collapse, but he will not surrender easily. A man like Cade, cornered and desperate, becomes more dangerous, not less. Then we need to be ready for whatever he does next. Rowan studied her for a long moment, something like gratitude passing behind his eyes. He repeated softly. You could walk away from this, Elira. Now that you know the truth, no one would blame you for stepping back from a situation far larger and more dangerous than anything you agreed to that night at the ritual. I didn't choose you because I understood who you were, Elira said, meeting his gaze steadily. I chose you because, in a room full of cruelty, you were the only person who offered me kindness without asking for anything in return. That hasn't changed, regardless of your title. If anything, knowing what you've risked to protect families like mine only makes me more certain I made the right choice that night. Something shifted in Rowan's expression, relief and something warmer blending together as he reached for her hand, the same gesture he had offered the night of the ritual, when she knelt before him in desperation and he had simply, quietly, helped her rise. Then we face the challenge together, he said. Whatever Cade intends, we will not face it unprepared. Over the following days, word began to spread through careful, controlled channels, guards who had witnessed the ambush speaking quietly among trusted friends, whispers building into something the council could no longer dismiss as simple rumor. Garrick, having recognized the discipline in Rowan's movements during the ambush, made discreet inquiries of his own, eventually confirming through contacts within neighboring territories that a description matching Rowan's had been circulating for months, tied to rumors of the Ember Throne's king traveling incognito to investigate corruption among allied packs. Cade, unaware that his own former challenge had accelerated a revelation he desperately wanted to prevent, continued preparing for what he believed would be a public execution disguised as tradition. He gathered support among council members loyal to his influence, promising rewards and favors to those who backed his accusations, building a case designed to ensure that whatever happened during the challenge would be interpreted in his favor. Elira spent those days at Rowan's side, watching him prepare not with weapons or training, though she suspected he needed neither, but with quiet conversations among the guards and servants who had grown to trust him during his months of careful disguise. He gathered testimony, built alliances, and slowly assembled the proof he needed to ensure that when the truth finally emerged, it would be undeniable. The night before the scheduled challenge, Elira found him standing alone near the edge of the training grounds, staring toward the mountains that marked the border of the territory he had left behind months ago to walk among servants and guards, hiding a crown beneath simple clothing and quiet humility. Are you ready? She asked softly, coming to stand beside him. As ready as I can be, Rowan admitted. Tomorrow changes everything, Elira. Once the truth is known, there is no returning to the quiet life I've lived these past months. I will be a king again, with all the responsibility and distance that comes with the title. Does that frighten you? He turned to look at her, something tender and uncertain in his expression. The title has never frightened me, he said. What frightens me is the possibility that once you see me as a king rather than the servant you chose, something between us might change in ways I cannot control. Elira reached for his hand, holding it steadily despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. I chose the man who helped me rise when the whole world was laughing, she said quietly. Crown or no crown, servant or king, that choice remains the same. Whatever tomorrow reveals, I intend to stand beside you through it. Rowan's fingers tightened gently around hers, and for a moment, standing together beneath a sky full of quiet stars, the danger waiting for them the following day felt, if only briefly, a little less overwhelming. The morning of the challenge arrived with a tension that seemed to settle over the entire pack like fog rolling down from the mountains. Word had spread overnight, whispers turning into open speculation among warriors and servants alike, though no one dared voice the rumor directly for fear of being wrong, or worse, being right in a way that would draw Cade's anger down upon them. The council hall filled quickly, every seat taken, warriors lining the walls 3 deep, servants crowding near the doors despite tradition normally keeping them at a distance from formal proceedings. Elira stood near the front of the crowd, her heart pounding as she watched the council elders take their seats along the raised platform. Cade arrived last, dressed in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the morning light streaming through the hall's high windows, his expression carrying the confident satisfaction of a man who believed victory was already secured. Rowan entered from the servants' side of the hall, dressed simply as he had been every day since Elira first knelt before him, and the contrast between his plain clothing and Cade's polished armor drew murmurs from the assembled crowd. If Rowan felt any nerves about what was about to unfold, his expression betrayed none of it, his bearing calm and steady as he crossed the stone floor to stand before the council. The lead elder, an aging wolf named Cohen who had presided over the park's traditions for decades, rose to address the gathering. "We are here," Cohen said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, to address accusations brought forward by Warlord Kate Thornwell against the servant known as Rowan. The accusation claims collusion with hostile forces during the recent border ambush. Tradition allows the accused to answer through formal challenge, proving loyalty and worth through combat witnessed by this council. Kate stepped forward, his voice ringing with practiced confidence. "I stand ready to see this matter settled properly," he said, his eyes flicking toward Rowan with barely concealed contempt. "Let the truth of his nature be revealed before us all." Rowan remained still for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the gathered council, the warriors, the servants pressed near the doorway, before finally settling on Cade with an expression that had shed every trace of the humble servant he had pretended to be for months. "Before this challenge proceeds," Rowan said, his voice carrying a new authority that seemed to still the entire room, "I believe the council deserves to understand exactly who they are asking to fight, and exactly why Warlord Cade is so determined to see this matter settled through combat rather than honest investigation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cade's confident expression flickered, uncertainty creeping in at the edges. "Save your excuses for the combat ring," he said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "I am not offering excuses," Rowan said calmly. "I am offering truth, which is more than this council has received from Warlord Cade in recent months." He turned to address Cohen directly. "I did not come to this park as a servant seeking work. I came because reports reached me of corruption within this council, resources meant for vulnerable families being redirected for personal enrichment by certain members with influence over park decisions. I chose to observe quietly, without revealing my position, to gather proof that could not be dismissed or buried by those responsible." "And what position is that?" Cohen asked slowly, though something in his expression suggested he already suspected the answer, perhaps confirmed by whispers that had reached even the council's careful ears. Rowan straightened, and the change that came over him in that moment was unmistakable, a shift in bearing that transformed the quiet servant into something entirely different, something that commanded attention without demanding it. "I am Rowan Ashgrave," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the silent hall. "Alpha King of the Ember Throne." The hall erupted into chaos. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the crowd, warriors turning to one another in stunned disbelief, servants near the doorway whispering urgently among themselves. Cade's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence collapsing into something closer to panic as the weight of the revelation settled over the gathering. "That is impossible," Cade said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The Ember Throne's king would never lower himself to servant work in a territory as modest as ours." "And yet here I stand," Rowan said calmly, "having done exactly that, because the well-being of families under my influence, even those beyond my direct territory, matters more to me than the comfort of maintaining appearances. I have spent months gathering testimony, documentation, and evidence of the corruption you have overseen, Kate Thornwell. Resources meant for struggling families, redirected through falsified reports to fund your personal ambitions and the loyalty of those you've bribed among this council." Cohen rose slowly from his seat, his expression grave. "You carry proof of these claims?" "I do," Rowan said, gesturing toward the servant's entrance, where Garrick stepped forward, carrying a bundle of documents he had helped gather during the weeks following the ambush. Behind him came several other guards and servants, each holding testimony they had quietly provided once Rowan's true purpose became clear to them. Cade's composure shattered entirely as the documents were presented before the council, records of falsified reports, testimonies from families who had received far less support than officially documented, evidence carefully assembled over months of patient observation. Elira watched from the crowd as Cade's carefully constructed authority crumbled piece by piece, the warriors who had once deferred to his influence now watching him with expressions of growing anger and betrayal. "This is a fabrication," Cade insisted, though his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "Lies constructed to discredit me, orchestrated by a king with no true authority over this park's internal matters. The Ember Throne holds authority through trade agreements and protection treaties that extend to territories such as this one," Cohen said slowly, his eyes hard as he studied Cade with newfound suspicion. If these claims prove accurate, your position on this council is forfeit, Kate Thornwell, and the consequences will extend far beyond simple removal. The hall fell into stunned silence as the council began reviewing the evidence more closely, whispered conversations spreading through the gathered crowd like wildfire. Elira watched Kate's face shift through disbelief, anger, and finally something closer to desperation as he realized the trap he had built for Rowan had instead sprung shut around himself. "You cannot simply remove me based on the word of a king-playing servant," Kate said, turning to address the crowd directly, searching for allies among the warriors who had once supported his influence. "This is manipulation, an attempt by outside power to control our territory's affairs." But the warriors who might once have rallied behind him now averted their eyes, unwilling to align themselves publicly with a man whose corruption had just been laid bare before the entire pack. Garrick stepped forward again, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed enough to no longer doubt where the truth lay. "I served on that border patrol," Garrick said, addressing the council directly. "I watched Rowan defend us during the ambush with skill no servant should possess. I made inquiries afterward and confirmed reports matching descriptions of the Ember Throne's king traveling in disguise. Whatever doubts I carried have been settled. I stand by the truth of his claims." Other voices joined Garrick's, guards, and servants who had quietly gathered evidence over the preceding weeks, each testimony adding weight to the case against Cade until the council's judgment became less a matter of deliberation and more a formality confirming what the assembled evidence had already made undeniable. Corwin raised his staff, calling for order as the hall settled into tense silence once more. "The council finds sufficient evidence to strip Cade Thornwell of his position and standing within this pack, pending further investigation into the full extent of his corruption," he announced, his voice heavy with the gravity of the decision. "Guards, escort him from this hall." Cade's expression twisted with fury and disbelief as guards moved to flank him, warriors who had once followed his orders without question now treating him as nothing more than another wolf who had abused his position. He turned toward Rowan, his voice dropping to something low and venomous. "This isn't finished," he said quietly, though the threat carried little weight against guards already leading him toward the hall's exit. "Kings fall too, Ashgrave. Remember that." Rowan watched him go without visible reaction, though Elira noticed the slight tension in his shoulders easing only once Cade had fully disappeared from the hall. The gathered crowd remained in stunned silence for a long moment before Corwin spoke again, addressing Rowan directly. "The council owes you an apology," Corwin said, "and gratitude, for exposing corruption that has damaged families under our protection for far too long. We did not know. We should have known. Corruption often hides best among those too comfortable to look closely," Rowan said, his tone carrying no bitterness, only quiet understanding. "I do not ask for apology, only for genuine reform, and for the families harmed by these actions to receive what they were always owed." Corwin nodded solemnly, gesturing for the council scribes to begin documenting the reparations that would need to be made, resources redirected properly to families like Elira's who had suffered under years of quiet exploitation disguised as pack tradition. As the hall slowly began to empty, whispers still spreading among the crowd like ripples across still water, Elira made her way toward Rowan, her mind still reeling from everything that had unfolded. He turned toward her as she approached, something uncertain flickering behind his composed expression, as though bracing himself for a reaction he could not predict. "You did it," she said softly. "It's over." "This part is over," Rowan agreed, though his eyes carried a weariness that suggested the larger truth still weighed heavily on him. "But everything else, Elira, everything between us, that remains uncertain now. You knelt before a servant that night, not a king. I understand if the truth changes how you see what happened between us." Elira studied him for a long moment, taking in the exhaustion behind his careful composure, the vulnerability he had kept hidden beneath months of quiet disguise, finally allowed to surface now that the weight of his secret had lifted. "I knelt before a man who offered me kindness when the entire world offered only cruelty," she said finally. "That man is standing in front of me right now, crown or no crown. Nothing about that has changed, Rowan. If anything, understanding what you risk to protect families like mine only deepens what I already felt." Relief passed visibly across his features, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something close to open joy replace the careful restraint he had carried for so long. The hall around them continued to empty, whispers and speculation trailing every departing wolf, but for a brief moment, standing together amid the aftermath of everything that had unfolded. The noise of the world outside felt distant and unimportant. "There is still much to address," Rowan said finally, though his voice carried warmth now rather than the careful distance of earlier days. "My position, my responsibilities, the reforms this pact requires. None of it will be simple." "I never expected simple," Elira said, a small smile finally breaking through the tension she had carried since the ritual first began. "I chose the weak servant to escape humiliation, Rowan. I never imagined I would end up choosing a king instead, but I find myself glad, more than I can properly express, that both turned out to be the very same person." The weeks following Cade's removal brought changes to the Nightfall Pact that Elira could scarcely have imagined only a month before. Council meetings that had once been closed to ordinary members of the pact now included representatives from families who had long been overlooked, their voices finally giving weight in decisions that affected their daily lives. Reforms moved slowly, as reforms often do, but the direction was unmistakable, and for the first time in years, Elira watched her mother move through their small cottage without the constant undercurrent of worry that had shadowed every decision their family made. Rowan remained in the territory during this transition, though everyone now understood exactly who worked among them. Gone was the simple servant's disguise, replaced by clothing that, while still modest by royal standards, no longer hid the bearing of a man accustomed to command. Guards who had once stepped aside for him instinctively now did so openly, their earlier confusion replaced by genuine respect. Yet despite the transformation in how the pack perceived him, Rowan's manner toward Elira and her family remained unchanged. He still helped repair the cottage's aging fence when he found time between council meetings. He still sat with Marian in the evenings, listening patiently as she explained the properties of various healing herbs, genuinely curious rather than merely polite. The stillness that had first drawn Elira's attention during the ritual remained present in him, even now that the world understood the full weight of who he truly was. "You could return to the Ember Throne immediately," Elira said one evening, watching him from the doorway as he finished securing a loose board on the roof. "Your kingdom has surely noticed your absence by now. Why remain here, tending to fences that aren't even yours to maintain?" Rowan climbed down carefully before answering, brushing dust from his hands. "Because reform requires more than a single revelation in a council hall," he said. "Cade's corruption ran deeper than what we exposed that day. Removing him was only the beginning. If I leave now, before the pact's new systems are properly established, everything we uncovered risks being quietly buried again by whoever steps into the vacuum he left behind. And your kingdom manages without you in the meantime." "My advisors are capable," Rowan said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "And I send instructions regularly. But there is something else keeping me here, Elira, something that has little to do with council reforms." She felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze, though months of growing closeness had done little to prepare her for the directness of his attention now that pretense no longer stood between them. "And what is that?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You," he said simply. "I came to this territory to investigate corruption, and I found something I never expected to find, someone who saw past every disguise I wore, who chose kindness even when the entire world offered her cruelty instead. I am not eager to leave that behind simply because circumstances now allow me to return home." The words settled warmly in her chest, though a familiar worry still lingered beneath the comfort of them. "The bond between us began as an escape," she said quietly. "A way to avoid humiliation during the ritual, nothing more. Now that everyone understands who you are, surely there are expectations, obligations that a king cannot simply set aside because of a bond formed under desperate circumstances." Rowan stepped closer, his expression serious now, though warmth remained beneath the gravity of his tone. "There are indeed expectations that come with my position," he acknowledged. "But none of them require me to dishonor a bond freely chosen, regardless of the circumstances that first brought it into being. I have watched you these past months, Elira, long before either of us understood the full truth of what stood between us. I have seen your strength, your loyalty to your family, your willingness to face danger rather than abandon someone you had only just begun to know. Whatever expectations come with my crown, none of them outweigh what I have come to feel for you." Before she could respond, a messenger arrived at the cottage gate, breathless from running, carrying news that immediately shifted the mood of the evening. Cade, who had been confined to a modest holding near the park's border while the council finalized its investigation, had escaped during the night, slipping past guards whose vigilance had perhaps grown too comfortable in the weeks since his removal. He cannot have gone far, Rowan said, his earlier warmth replaced instantly by focused alertness. Gather Garrick and whatever guards remain on duty. I want the border checkpoints alerted immediately. The messenger departed quickly, and Elira felt the familiar cold dread of danger settling over her once more, memories of the ambush and everything that followed rushing back with unwelcome clarity. You think he means to cause more trouble, she said, though it was less a question than a statement of certainty. I think a man who has lost everything he built through corruption and manipulation is unlikely to simply disappear quietly, Rowan said grimly. Cade will want retribution, and given how thoroughly his plans have already failed, I suspect he will act with less caution and more desperation than before. They spent the following days in careful vigilance, guards patrolling the territory's borders with renewed diligence, Rowan coordinating efforts between council leadership and the Ember Throne's own resources, which he quietly began mobilizing despite his earlier insistence on avoiding overt use of royal authority within Nightfall's internal affairs. Elira found herself drawn into these efforts as well, her knowledge of the surrounding terrain from years of gathering herbs proving useful in identifying paths Cade might use to slip past patrol routes. The confrontation, when it finally came, arrived not through stealth but through Cade's own desperate arrogance. He appeared at the edge of the training grounds one evening, flanked by a small group of mercenaries he had apparently hired using resources hidden before his removal, resources the council's investigation had not yet uncovered. His expression carried none of the confident superiority Elira remembered from the ritual months before, replaced instead by something hollow and desperate, a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to protect. I will not simply disappear into exile while you sit comfortably with everything I once held, Cade said, his voice carrying across the training grounds as guards moved swiftly to surround the small group of intruders. You took my position, my standing, everything I built. I intend to take something from you in return. Rowan stepped forward calmly, positioning himself carefully between Cade's group and where Elira stood alongside Garrick and several other guards who had rushed to respond to the disturbance. This ends now, Cade, Rowan said, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. Whatever grievance you carry, resorting to hide violence will only compound the consequences you already face. Consequences, Cade repeated bitterly. You speak of consequences as though you understand what it means to lose everything in a single afternoon. I built my standing over decades, Ashgrave. You destroyed it with a handful of documents and a title you hid from everyone for months. I destroyed nothing that you did not build through the exploitation of families who trusted this pact to protect them, Rowan replied, his tone hardening. Your standing was never truly yours. It was built on resources stolen from people who had no power to stop you. That ends today, regardless of what desperate measures you attempt now. Cade's mercenaries shifted uneasily, clearly outnumbered by the guards who had gathered in response to the disturbance, their earlier confidence wavering as they recognized the poor odds of whatever confrontation Cade had intended to provoke. Garrick stepped forward, his sword drawn but his posture measured rather than aggressive. Stand down, Garrick said firmly, addressing the mercenaries directly. Whatever payment Cade promised you, it isn't what will happen if this escalates further. The council has already documented his crimes. Continuing to serve him only ensures you share in his punishment. The mercenaries exchanged uncertain glances, and one by one, they began lowering their weapons, unwilling to risk their own safety for a man whose cause had clearly already collapsed. Cade watched his hired support dissolve around him with mounting desperation, until finally he stood alone, facing Rowan and the assembled guards with nothing left but empty defiance. This isn't over, Cade said, though his voice had lost all its earlier conviction. You may have won today, but corruption doesn't disappear simply because one man is removed. Someone else will take my place eventually, someone who understands how easily these systems can be exploited. Perhaps, Rowan acknowledged, but that is precisely why the reforms we've begun matter more than any single removal. Systems built on transparency and accountability are far harder to exploit than ones that rely on unchecked authority. Your removal was never the end goal, Cade. It was simply the first necessary step. Guards moved to restrain Cade as he made one final attempt to flee, though the effort proved futile against warriors who had trained far longer and more seriously than the desperate warlord whose influence had crumbled so completely. He was led away in silence this time, no venomous parting words, only the quiet resignation of a man who understood that whatever future awaited him would be shaped entirely by consequences he had brought upon himself. Elira released a breath she had not realized she was holding as the tension finally drained from the training grounds, guards dispersing gradually as the immediate danger passed. Rowan turned to her immediately, his earlier composed authority softening back into the warmth she had grown to associate with him over the preceding months. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hand finding hers instinctively. "I am now," she said, allowing herself finally to relax against the steady comfort of his presence. "I think perhaps we can both agree that Cade will not trouble this pack again." "I believe you're right," Rowan said, though something thoughtful lingered behind his relief. "This confrontation only reinforces something I've been considering these past weeks. The reforms here need continued attention, certainly, but they no longer require my constant presence to move forward properly. The Council has learned, through hard experience, the value of vigilance and transparency. I believe they are capable of continuing that work themselves." "What are you saying?" Elira asked, though a hopeful warmth had already begun spreading through her chest at the direction of his words. "I am saying," Rowan said, turning to face her fully, "that I intend to return to the Ember Throne soon, to resume my full responsibilities as its king. And I am asking whether you would consider joining me, not merely as someone bonded to me through a ritual born of desperate circumstances, but as my queen, chosen freely, with full understanding of everything that title would require." The question hung in the air between them, carrying a weight far beyond anything either had faced during the ritual months before. Elira thought of her mother, of the family she would be leaving behind, of the enormous distance between the quiet servant's life she had known and the responsibilities that would come with standing beside a king in his own territory. But she thought too of every moment since that first night, the steady hand that had helped her rise when the world laughed, the quiet courage he had shown facing corruption without ever losing the gentleness that first drew her attention, the safety she had felt beside him even before she understood the full truth of who he was. "My family," she began, though Rowan gently interrupted before she could finish the thought, "would be welcome to visit as often as they wish, and I would ensure their comfort and security regardless of distance," he said. "I would never ask you to abandon those you love, Elira. I only ask whether you might build a new life alongside me, one that honors everything that first brought us together." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had knelt beside her as a servant and revealed himself as a king, who had chosen quiet sacrifice over comfortable power, who had never once, in all the months she had known him, asked anything of her that she was not freely willing to give. "Yes," she said finally, the word carrying a certainty that surprised even her. "I chose you that night to escape humiliation, Rowan, but everything since then has been a choice made freely, again and again, because of who you truly are, not despite it. I would be honored to stand beside you, wherever that path leads us." The formal announcement, when it came weeks later, took place not in the grand halls of the Ember Throne, though Elira would eventually come to know that magnificent territory as her new home, but in the same council hall where the ritual had first bound them together under circumstances born of cruelty and desperation. The hall was filled once more, warriors and servants alike gathered to witness a ceremony that carried none of the humiliation of the ritual months before. Marin stood proudly near the front, tears of joy rather than worry shining in her eyes as she watched her daughter prepare to step into a future none of them could have imagined when the Pack Council first announced its plans for that fateful ritual. Corwin, still serving as the Pack's senior elder despite the significant reforms reshaping the council's structure, stood to address the gathered crowd. "Months ago," he began, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, "this chamber witnessed a moment meant to humiliate and diminish. Tonight, we witness instead a testament to what genuine kindness and courage can build, even from circumstances designed to destroy them." Rowan stood at the center of the hall, dressed now in the formal attire befitting his true station, though Elira noticed the same quiet steadiness in his bearing that had first caught her attention when he wore nothing but a servant's simple robes. He extended his hand toward her, the same gesture he had offered that first night, and she crossed the stone floor to stand beside him, no longer kneeling in desperation but walking forward freely, chosen and choosing in equal measure. Before this pack, and before witnesses who will carry word of this moment to the Ember Throne and beyond, Rowan announced, his voice carrying the authority of a king who had spent months learning what true strength looked like among the very people he had come to protect, "I present Elira Voss, chosen not through the cold formality of ritual tradition, but through genuine bond freely built between us, as Queen of the Ember Throne. The hall erupted into applause and cheers, a stark contrast to the cruel laughter that had once filled this same space, and Elira felt the warmth of that acceptance settle over her like the first true sunlight after a long, difficult winter. She looked toward her mother, whose tears now fell freely with unmistakable joy, and toward Garrick and the other guards who had risked their own standing to speak truth against Kate's corruption, and finally toward Rowan, whose steady gaze held nothing but genuine warmth and quiet pride. "They laughed the night I knelt before you," she said softly, meant only for him amid the celebration surrounding them. "I wonder what they think now." "I imagine," Rowan said, a small smile finally breaking through his composed bearing, "they understand now what I recognized from the very first moment you chose me. That true worth was never about titles or standing, but about the courage to offer kindness even when the world expects only cruelty in return." As the celebration continued around them, the pack that had once mocked her humiliation now witnessing her rise into a future none of them could have predicted, Elira allowed herself finally to release the last remnants of fear and uncertainty that had followed her since that difficult night. Whatever challenges awaited her at the Ember Throne, whatever responsibilities came with the crown she was about to share, she faced them now not with the desperate courage of a woman escaping humiliation, but with the steady confidence of someone who had found, in the most unexpected circumstances imaginable, a partnership built on genuine respect, patient kindness, and a bond that had proven, through every trial that followed, far stronger than either of them could have known that very first night. The servant she had chosen to escape humiliation had indeed been a king in disguise. But the truth that mattered most, in the end, was not the crown he carried, but the character he had shown long before anyone understood the weight of the title behind it, and it was that character, steady and kind through every difficulty they faced together, that had truly won her heart.